welcome Jon.
Hey.
Jon Henshaw, co-founder and president of Raven Tools. If you don't know, they're a digital marketing and reporting platform. And he's been involved with website development and internet strategy since 1995. And if you don't know your internet history, that's right there at the beginning, folks. Before Raven, he worked as an interactive designer for Visa in Denver, and he helped develop web applications for their consumer and corporate customers. But today, he's here with us at Digital Olympus talking about essential on-page SEO. We love that topic here at Page One Power, and Jon, take it away.
Okay, well, I wanted to show off. I'm wearing my T-shirt for the day, which came just in time yesterday, all the way from Russia to the United States. It was awesome, so it's perfect timing. Just real quick, I'm from Nashville, Tennessee, and I'm co-founder and president of Raven, and I have a deep passion for SEO. And so today, what we're going to get into is what I'm calling essential on-page SEO, and so this is really geared towards people who maybe don't do SEO for a living, who maybe do social marketing, do a lot of other things, have dabbled in SEO, and so if that is you, then you should get a lot out of this. If you're a seasoned SEO, you should also still get some things out of this too. I will be covering some slightly more advanced techniques, but again, it's really more for people who are web designers, web developers, other types of marketers who really want to have an idea of, what are the main basic things that I need to have to make sure that I'm doing what I need to do regarding SEO. And so I'll go ahead and get started. And the first one's going to seem kind of like, okay, that seems pretty simple, but it's not. For a lot of people, they will just kind of host their site anywhere, and any type of cheap hosting, that type of thing. And if you aren't using a good hosting provider, and by a good hosting provider, I mean somebody like, there's a ton of them, but I use Pair Networks. WP Engine's a really good hosting provider, particularly if you use WordPress. And there's many, many others that I would recommend. But the reason why this is important is because this is your presence. And if you go with a cheap hosting provider or one that's not very reliable, then that could actually hurt you in the search results, particularly if it's something that's going down a lot, or if they put you on a server with a bunch of people and that server is slow, then you really don't want that. That can adversely affect you. So that's like the first thing I usually tell everybody is, where's your site? Where are you hosting it? And then the next thing that I will generally talk about is just how people approach their site architecture. And usually what I run into is we have a navigation that is not keyword centric. We have URLs that are also not keyword centric, and it's kind of a mess. And typically what you want to do is you want to build your site around what people will search for. And so that's the next one. And then the other sort of like quick hit is just around SSL. And that is, I used to say consider SSL, now I'm actually saying unless you are an established site and for whatever reason it would be just harder, really difficult to switch over to SSL, you need to go ahead and do that because that's where things are going. And I'm going to talk about something called HTTP2 in a little bit, and that is currently required in order to use that. So if you haven't switched over to making your site secure, you should probably go ahead and do that. So making your site mobile and responsive. Now, a lot of people are making it responsive, they aren't making it mobile, and I'll get into that too in a little bit. And so when people think of a mobile-friendly site, they're actually thinking of a responsive site, and they're thinking about something that just kind of adjusts as it shows up at a different width. But there is a lot more to think about in regards to a mobile site, especially when it comes to images, because mobile doesn't mean just adjusting the view of your site within a browser. It also means making it faster and maybe potentially swapping out some assets. But sticking with responsive, and what I usually recommend is if you're on WordPress, I really like, there's a theme where you can make child themes, and it's called PDIG, and that's something I recommend. The thing that I use the most personally is a framework called Zurb Foundation. And so there's a lot of them out there. There's things like Bootstrap and so on out there, but Zurb Foundation is generally what I recommend. I like how they've put it together. It's very search engine friendly, and it's extremely configurable. And one of the things they allow you to do, especially for somebody like me who doesn't want to have all the things, they have a customizable download for their software, just really just JavaScript and CSS. And so you can pick and choose what you'd want to have with that. And so Zurb Foundation is what I build pretty much all my sites off of now, including for WordPress. I will convert that into a WordPress theme. And so after you've done that, after you've really thought about your site architecture, you're on a decent host, you've done all these kind of basic things, and then what I really try to hammer in on is making everything faster. That is a really big deal now, especially when it comes to mobile. And so I used to recommend using, say, like a content delivery network, a CDN for your assets. And so your assets typically means JavaScript files and images and those type of things. However, more recently, I have just been converted over to pushing people to use Cloudflare. And the reason for that is because instead of just doing just your assets, the way it works is you pass everything through Cloudflare, and it's basically a CDN for your entire site. But the thing that I get the most excited about in regards to Cloudflare is that it supports HTTP2. And HTTP2 is a new standard for essentially delivering all of the data to the browser. And before, or even today, how it works is everything is sent individually, and now everything's like in a multi-thread, and it's really, really fast. It can be anywhere from 5 times faster or more, and so we do that at our own company for our own marketing site. So raventools.com actually runs through Cloudflare, and we've seen a huge increase on that, and we also use it for our apps. And then aside from that, I've really been pushing people to seriously look at their images. Even though a lot of people think that if I just do my page titles and I kind of do all those other things I've talked about, now I've SEO'd. Particularly when it comes to mobile, images is where you can make some of the biggest gains and how you can make your site way faster, and we know that speed is a ranking factor, so that's something you want to focus on. And so I encourage people to do that. And one of the things that a lot of people don't know about is that SVG, which is a vector image, is now supported pretty much across the board. And so a lot of times people will still use pings and JPEGs to use their images when they could actually serve a tiny, tiny little image, which is really just a vector image with SVG. And so whenever I can use SVG, I do. And so I encourage people to do that. And however, you still, particularly with more complex images, need to use JPEGs or pings. And so when I use those, I always run it through sort of an optimizer. And so what an optimizer does is it removes everything that you don't need the image. It tries to compress, if it can, even more. And then you eventually get a smaller image. And in most cases, particularly with pings, I'll save anywhere from 20 to 40% of the size. And what's important, though, about this is that you don't lose any of the clarity of the image. There's nothing lost in the image as far as what you see. It's just all in the background. It's all code-wise, but now you're serving a much smaller image. And if you're like most people, you use WordPress. And so there's a great plugin out there called it's kind of a strange name, which is an image optimizer plugin that will actually do this automatically for all the images that you add via WordPress. And so that's an easy way to do it without having to use the app I showed before called ImageOptim. So as far as the different devices that are going to be looking at your site, I mentioned earlier that a lot of people will create a responsive site, but not necessarily a mobile-friendly site. And so an example of that is people will use an image like that, the 1024 pixel image I have here, and that's the image they use. So basically, if they access the site on the phone, all the picture does is resize and make it smaller, but it's still the size-wise, kilobyte-wise, is 1024. And so you're making the mobile user actually download a desktop version image when they don't need to. And so what I encourage everyone to do is to make literally different size images for the device that is viewing it. And so you can, what you can do is you can use a new standard HTML attribute called source set. And what source set will do is after you've made all of those different size images, you can then specify them and basically say, hey, if the screen width is this size or smaller, then I want you to serve this image instead. And so this is a HTML standard, works with all modern browsers. It doesn't require anything special like JavaScript or even CSS. It just works. And so if I were to have an image that, if I were on a device, like say a tablet, where the width was 640 or below, then it's going to know that it should serve this different image, this medium-sized image, instead of the larger, bigger image. And so you just saved potentially a lot of space, particularly if you have a site that is very image-rich. And this also works with the high DPI, or some people know as Retina screen. And so all you do there is you take your high DPI image and you add 2x at the end for that particular one. And then if the visitor is on a high definition screen or a Retina screen and they're in their browser, then the browser will know to deliver that image instead of the other one. So this has a potential to save a ton of bandwidth, particularly for those that are on mobile devices that are accessing via a cellular network, and that could be really, really fast. So I usually like to take it a step further, and by that what I mean is I like to optimize everything for the actual user experience when I can, as opposed to just making a smaller sized image. I like to make it so that it can be experienced the best by the user based on the device they're using. And so the example I have here is when I'm on a desktop, I am showing this bigger, larger image that has more information, has more visuals on there. However, what we've done is we've taken the same image, the same concept, and then just sort of like refactored it and redesigned the layout of it and made a smaller image. And so now I'm serving an image that's significantly smaller, but it can still be experienced really well by the visitor who's viewing that. And so that goes a long way both in speed and also how the person enjoys your site and wants to come back to it. There is a plugin out there for WordPress, which is called SourceSet. It will not obviously make it so that you can easily use different images like the example I just gave, but it will actually resize them for you. So it'll do something similar to the previous example I gave you, where it just kind of makes it a smaller image. But if you want to do something more unique, then you're going to have to hard code it with the example that I gave you before. So as far as speed goes, the gold standard that's out there, particularly since this is also who we're trying to optimize for as far as search engines go, is the Google PageSpeed Insights tool. And so the thing with this is that I always tell everybody, don't get your hopes up because you're never ever going to see a perfect score. It is incredibly difficult to pull off. I always like to give them an example of what that looks like because you're never going to see it, but this is what it looks like, 100 out of 100, and beautiful code that I made for that is only a few lines long. So it's very, very hard to do that. And yeah, and I call it a cruel joke because it is. And you literally can't win with it. And the reason why is because there's so many factors that usually go with a site, particularly if you're running it on WordPress. And so there are things that you can't control, in particular external JavaScript that you're actually linking to, but you're not hosting locally. That is very typical for if you're using social sharing software, or even using linking to JavaScript directly from, say, Facebook or different places like that. Pinterest is notorious for having some of the slowest code that you can link to, and so you don't have any control over that unless you were to, say, download it to your server, but then you won't have the latest copy, so I don't recommend that. The other thing is with WordPress plugins, and so WordPress plugins, you can't really update or optimize the files inside that plugin. Technically you can, but the problem is that when that plugin has an update, there's a really good chance it's going to overwrite whatever it is that you did to optimize that for page speed. So you have to give up on those things and know that's just the way it's going to be. One of the things that you can do, though, that will still make it faster is, going back near the beginning of the presentation, is use Cloudflare. So Cloudflare will actually optimize most of those things. It just won't be able to optimize the offsite code. So all is not lost, and there are things you can do still. One of the things that you want to focus on are kind of more UX related, and that is fixing your size tap targets. And so this is important because what it means is anything that you would tap on, like a link or a button or that type of thing, if they are too close together, it gets really difficult to use. And so Google has made standards for how far they need to be, which is usually around 40 pixels apart. And so those are things that you can control. And they're layout oriented, but you can add some padding, add some spacing to your elements on the page that people would tap on, and that is going to improve your score. Something for the web developers, because I have more of a kind of a web design background, is there was a time in the very beginning where we used inline CSS, and then it became a no-no, and we were supposed to put everything into individual CSS files and that type of thing. Now there is a trend back towards actually using inline CSS again, because it makes less calls. It means, because one of the things you want to do that, even though it's really slight, but will speed things up, is to make less calls to other files. And so instead of making calls to a bunch of CSS files, try to put that CSS inside that page instead. So it's just part of the HTML document. And the caveat I throw in here is that I don't mean applying inline CSS to the actual elements, to the actual HTML components. I mean doing it inside of the head area as just a bunch of styles inside there. So it's kind of like copying and pasting what was in the CSS file and just putting it inside the head area, so it's all served in one compressed text file. And then important to point out, simply because a lot of people forget to do this, seasoned SEOs won't, but if this is not something that you're always thinking about, don't forget the meta information. Again, simple, but your page titles matter. These are the things that are oftentimes neglected, or somebody tries to automate them and they end up being atrocious, so make sure you give some attention to that. And don't skip the descriptions. This is, again, another really big thing that people will forget. And if they don't forget it, for example, they're like, oh, everything has a description. A lot of times, again, in an attempt to automate or for speed, they're all duplicate descriptions. And so we want to try to avoid doing duplication, because then it looks like you're automating things to the bot and to the algorithm. So what you want to do is you really want to try to do unique descriptions for all the pages. Make sure you're using OpenGraph, and this is both for bots and for social sharing, because there's a lot of rich data that you're passing along using that. The easiest way to do this, particularly if you're on WordPress, is to use Yoast's SEO plugin, because it has it all built in, and it will automatically insert that OpenGraph data, and you'll be taken care of. And so again, not only does it deliver that information, it is also seen by bots because it's very informational rich as far as titles and who wrote it and that type of thing. So staying with that, because that's OpenGraph is a form of structured data. If you haven't used structured data yet, you should be. And the reason why is, the first reason is actually because it can enhance your search results. And so a lot of people, I'm sure, have seen these type of results where you have ratings and images and that type of thing. Those are all powered by schema.org or by some form of structured data that Google supports, like microdata or RDFA. But I recommend schema.org mainly because it was created by Google. So if that's what Google made and that's what they want, then that's the thing that I generally would recommend that you use. Now, traditionally, it has been difficult to actually integrate schema.org into your site. And the reason why has been because you've had to sort of insert it into the HTML. Before this was seen as brilliant because these are really just pieces of data. They were attributes that you wouldn't change the way that your page looked to visitors, but gave a lot of information to search engine bots. The problem is, again, it's just that you have to insert it everywhere, and it's really difficult. So the new way of doing this, and what I would consider to be the better way, is to use JSON LD, which is basically a piece of JavaScript that goes up usually in the head area of your HTML, and you can put everything there that you want. That's, if you're using WordPress, then most, if not all of these things can be inserted dynamically using their codecs. So these are all things that you can automate and that you can put in here, and this is the way I recommend going forward if anybody's going to be using schema.org and structured data to do this. Now, it's still a little complicated and a little difficult to kind of do this for most people, particularly web designers. It's easier for a developer. It's not easier for the rest of us. And so there's a really great app that I was introduced to maybe 6 or 12 months ago, and it's called Schema App. And so Schema App is a tool where it's brilliant, actually, where you can access pretty much all of the different schema.org types. You pick the one you want, like say person or that type of thing, or product, and then you fill out the form, and then you press a button, and it outputs the JSON LD code for you. So I really recommend that. Very, very cool tool. And typically when I talk to people about Google and how they think and where they're going and what's next, I really just say, do what makes sense to Google. If you're watching Google, then you'll know that things like speed makes sense, and therefore it's going to be a ranking factor. These are all things if you're just paying even a little attention to what Google's talking about and what's important to them, what generally happens is it influences how sites rank eventually. And so mobile is probably one of the biggest ones right now that is becoming a ranking factor, and it's something they're heavily, heavily focused on. And so because of that, I like to look at, I like to be sort of ahead of the game. Where are they going, and what can I do now that would be both beneficial to my visitors, but also may potentially help me rank even better or perform better on search engine results in the future. And so knowing that they care about time, knowing they care about actions in UX, the thing that I am now recommending that people do is to actually focus on their form inputs, particularly for mobile. And so while I haven't done the research, nor do I think this is a ranking factor today, I think it's going to be. And even if it never becomes one, this is something that will make your users love you. And so very, very simple is to go back and reevaluate all the forms on your site, and anything that can be optimized by a more relevant input type, you should do. And the reason why is because when somebody's on a mobile device or on a tablet, it actually changes the way that they input information, making it faster and more efficient and a better user experience. And so if I change it to number, I actually get this particular keyboard instead of all of my text. But you can really see it at work when you add date. So when I do date, then I actually get my date picker, and this works on Android and iOS. Same thing is true with tel. So if it's a telephone input, then it makes it really easy for the user because they don't get the keyboard. Instead, they get this, and they can just tap in their numbers really quick and breeze through your form or whatever it might be that your page is trying to do. So the last part is about checking and monitoring for errors. So after you've done all the things that you could think to do as far as from a code perspective with your site, then really what you need to do is make sure you continue to check and monitor for errors. And the reason for this is because sometimes webmasters are doing something funky with your site. I've had plenty of people screw around with the robots.txt file, and all of a sudden things aren't in the index anymore. Something that happens really often are links get broken as people change content on the site, as the places you link out to don't work anymore, that type of thing. So I do encourage you to be doing that. That's generally what I do after I've done all my work. Google Search Console is an excellent place to do that, particularly because it's coming from Google, and they can give you errors that you wouldn't get anywhere else. The other thing I recommend is to use an actual site auditing tool. This is ours. There are others that are made out there, but this is a tool that will automatically crawl your site at whatever frequency you set it to be at, and then we'll let you know what are the things that you need to fix on your site, or we'll let you know if there are new things that have become broken that you need to take care of. So as a special to Digital Olympus, which I'm excited about, this link will take you to a private page that will let you sign up for early beta access to our new site auditor. So if you want to check that out, you can do that. It has a free account, so you don't have to pay any money to kind of get a taste for how it works. And with that being said, I am done with this presentation, and I will take questions if anybody has them.
John, appreciate that. Thank you very much. Fantastic presentation. Great advice that we can all put into action on our sites and on our client sites. And coming back to usability on mobile, when those specific type tools pop up for telephone, calendar, text, so helpful, and I noticed that in my own experience, and that it just kind of adds to that usability and takes away any frustration.
And I think it's, I've been doing this for so long, I'm like 90% convinced it's going to be one of their next things. Like at any time within the next 6 or 12 months, they're going to come out and say, hey, you need to do this now. And of course, we'll all jump because that's what SEOs do. Yeah. They say do this, and even it might be the most minute ranking factor if it becomes one. This is one of those things where, especially in the last few years, I would say, and with this emphasis on mobile, anything that makes something faster or makes a better user experience, they keep introducing or communicating that as something that influences their algorithm. And so this to me is just like the most obvious next thing.
I think another thing to keep in mind is when we measure speed, when we're in a testing format, we might be using a desktop to test mobile speed, whereas there might be people on the end of a mobile network that's 10 times slower than our testing speed. So any little increase in speed is a huge benefit to those outliers that might not have the fastest connection, might not be on the fastest network. And so the increases are a big benefit to those folks. We do have some questions coming in. You mentioned your site audit project. What would you say is the most killer feature on that?
Well, I have to say I've been working on this for about the last 9 to 10 months, and so it's become sort of a baby of mine. So I like a lot of things about it. I would say the thing I like the most is how we built the front end. It's actually using React, which is by Facebook, and so it's really, really fast. and then on top of that, it's truly a mobile-friendly app. In other words, from start to finish, you can go sign up, you can use the tool, you can literally use every component of it, access the tables, export the data, all that stuff, all on your phone. But it's also just really, really fast. So if you go to a table that has 1,000, sort of items in it, you just start typing, it's just instant. So that's the thing that kind of gets me pretty excited. I would say maybe the second thing might be the sharing feature. So we've made it so everything can be shared. If you run analysis on whatever site that you do, you can then click share, and it'll give you a link that you can give to anybody, or even post to Facebook if you wanted to, and it will give people access to all those results, and they can work with that data.
Just want to throw in this question from Heron. He says, do the clicks from mobile impact on search ranking?
Well, what we do know is that they, at least what they've been public about, is that they've always checked on bouncing and how, do you come back, that type of thing. And so I would say that they do, at least in that way, on mobile as they would on desktop, because it really doesn't change in any way. I mean, in other words, the fact that you're on mobile using a browser or you're on desktop using a browser, that behavior that they do track would be the same.
I hear you. Thank you for that answer. I wish we had more time. Jon Henshaw, everyone, thank you very much for joining us at Digital Olympus today. Go check out Raven Tools and all it has to offer. Follow Jon on Twitter at RavenJon, and that's a Jon without the H. And Jon, once again, thank you. Have a great day, and we appreciate you being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It was great.